What does it really take to reinvent yourself over and over again? In this episode of Rise and Reinvent, Hollywood screenwriter and life coach Brooks Elms opens up about grief, purpose, creativity, and the power of storytelling to heal and transform. Whether you're navigating change or chasing a deeper calling, Brooks shares wisdom that will challenge and inspire you. Tune in now. This is one episode you don't want to miss. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Brooks Elms to the Rise and Reinvent podcast. Brooks is a Hollywood screenwriter and life coach. He has 30 years of experience in the entertainment business and the personal growth business as well. Welcome, Brooks, to the Rise and Reinvent podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I always like to start with, the beginnings of Brooks, right? Where did you start your journey, your life, not your career, but how did you start off? Where were you born? Where are you from? What was the family and support system like in the early days?
Well, I grew up in I consider my hometown to be on Long Island. I grew up as a local in the Hamptons, but technically, well, not technically, I actually spent the first couple of years in Akron, Ohio. So Midwest up until second grade, and then my family split, and then I spent third grade on uh, in the Hamptons as a local, which is interesting because people think of the Hamptons, they think of the mansions and the limos and that sort of thing, which is a big part of it. And then there's this other part where I grew up with the mowing lawns for those people and trimming hedges, and a lot of people having a lot of resentment towards people that came out in the summer. And so, and that actually was an interesting dynamic in my house because my dad had come from a family that had some money. My mom had come from a blue collar background, and so and when they would fight, they often would fight about money. At least they thought they were fighting about money. And so, yeah, so those dynamics ran deep in me in terms of, my identity, blue collar, white collar, um, and money and that sort of thing, what it means to me, what it meant to them, and then having my own experience with it. Uh, so that was it. And then, yeah, so my dad wasn't around in the way that I wanted him. So that really was a big piece of adversity for me as a kid. And then how I dealt with that was really defining, I think, be a part of my personality, who I was. Because um, I missed him. I was lonely. I mean, I would visit him once a year over back in Ohio. Um, but but not having him around there was a big hole. It's kind of like, and so I tried to fill the hole with, being super likable or being like devoted to sports or, clinging on to best friendships, those sorts of things. And then ultimately realized that over many years and lots of personal growth, that there's nothing to do with that hole other than sit with it, be with it, understand it, accept it.
Okay. So how did that experience, as a young person impact you, the person you are today?
Really significant. So then not only was my dad not around just because of family dynamics, he died when I was 17. So that
Okay.
kicked it up a whole other level because I was in, there's 500 kids in East Hampton High School, and I think I was maybe one of three that lost a parent at that age. So so I was asking for deep questions, and I didn't even really mourn his loss or really grieve until probably my early 30s at this men's group weekend experience that I went to many years later. But I had a really good therapist in my 20s that dealt with it somewhat, but not real soul deep grief until my 30s. So um, it came out. I was angry. So it came out with a real sort of, to cover up that hole as a kid, I was playing the good boy all the time. And then I went to NYU film school and started studying movies and realized that, the movies that hit harder and people were really excited about were more personal stories. And so I started getting into personal filmmaking and then understanding myself and character driven work better, and then got into personal growth as well. And so yeah, so studying those dynamics, why they happened, how they happened, and how the dynamics that I went through are the similar. Everybody goes through their own. Everybody's facing some sort of adversity, and so screenwriting is a way of um, making sense of those and putting it into some sort of narrative. And when you start to understand story structure and understand yourself better, it all comes together pretty nicely. And so yeah, so the answer is, I studied those dynamics of my own life and then articulated them in screenplays, metaphorically, and then taught other people to do the same thing. Because as a life coach, I generally work with creatives, and then the output of the life coaching sessions is some sort of creative project, often a screenplay or a TV show or that sort of thing.
Such an interesting story. I'll be honest with you, before I started this podcast, I really didn't necessarily connect your upbringing with your adult livelihood. And on every single conversation, there's some connection back to when you were a kid, whether it was positive, whether it was challenging, whether it was adversity, it always relates to your long-term future. And so, to the parents listening, the actors
Yeah,
listening, they're watching, they're taking everything in, and so you have to remember that as you're raising children. So that's a sidebar. Back to you now. So, you haven't even gone through the full journey, but you've talked to us about, childhood to college to, your first job, right? During those times, talk about the the moments that really sparked reinvention for you. So going
yeah.
from, a student into the career world and, what are the things that changed during those processes of reinvention?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because in the film business, it's so hyper competitive. Um, so you can make a movie even then. So I made a movie. I went to NYU in the early '90s, and I made a feature film right after I graduated college. I was like, it's great, and I made it, and it was fine for what it was. But it took years to even edit it and get it together, and then try to get it out there. And then it was crickets. It wasn't like people were hiring me left and right to direct movies. And so I was like, oh, there's a problem because I was out of money at that point. I need to reinvent. And so, um, yeah, and so that for people that are artists, that's a really common thing. And so they go, well, how do I deal with this? Like, I got to pay the bills. I've got my art. And you can lean into it in a way that's really healthy, where you go, well, how come? Like, what's going on? What's the gap between my current level of mastery of the craft and what other people are doing that are actually building a bigger audience for it. And what was really interesting about at least my particular journey, I think, is that movie that I made in the '90s. Maybe 5,000 people saw it. Right? It played. I took it on a college. It was about my friends on the NYU soccer team. So it was kind of like a collegey movie made by a kid just out of college. And so I took it on a college tour and played on this camp. And so it was kind of like that sort of release and some festivals and that sort of thing. So maybe 5,000 people total saw that movie and it was on, video stores for a while. Um, but here's the thing. When the internet came along, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I uploaded a scene from that movie online and 1.1 million people saw that clip. So
Okay.
really interesting, right? So 5,000 people a day were watching that clip at one point, and that was more than who had seen the whole feature. But I didn't put all the dots together. I was just like, wow, that's cool, you know. And then I monetized it a little bit at one point and made like $86 for a month. And then they ended up pulling the clip down because it was kind of a saucy scene. It wasn't that bad. It's the internet. You can do whatever you want on the internet. But like, it wasn't that. It was an independent film, but it was this guy having this crazy experience at this party, right? But it was on for 4 years before they pulled it down. Anyways, so but I didn't really put it together that what you could actually do with the internet, and that's really the pivot that I'm making in my career now, especially with AI coming in. There's a complete. So what I did was, so in terms of reinvention, so I was like, oh shoot, this movie isn't like playing Sundance and getting me more work. What am I gonna do in the meantime? So I'm also an athlete. So I worked at this rec center in New York City. It's called Chelsea Piers. I was on that opening crew of Chelsea Piers in the 90s. But I would do whatever it took to sort of pay the bills, while I was still making movies. And then later I made another independent feature film. It was kind of the same thing. Like people that saw it thought it was okay, but it didn't really break through and get me work. Right. So then the reinvention at that point, but at that point I had a lot of experience, made two features, had started writers groups, and I started like my own online film school at that point. And that was fine, but I didn't like the marketing. I wasn't ready to reinvent myself in the marketing side. I was like, oh, I want to teach, but I don't want to market. But then years later, I got an opportunity to teach at UCLA Extension, and I was like, and they particularly liked that I had started this online film school because they had an online film program for me to teach, or a screenwriting program. So it's a great. So there's two reinventions. One is I started doing some teaching, and then the other one was because independent filmmaking at that point was expensive. I started I reinvented to writing screenplays because I could iterate faster. And then I also took a big old slice of humble pie because I'd made two features and put them out, and like, it was kind of, again, people that saw it, it screened all over the world, and I'm happy with what they are and I'm proud of them. And at the same time, it didn't get me work as a writer or a director. And I was like, well, what's going on? What's the gap between what I'm doing and what I need to do? And so then I started learning Hollywood story structure at a whole deeper level because I was good at holding attention in short bursts, but not so much the longer 90-minute experience. And then once I really studied how Hollywood held attention, then it changed. Then I got signed at UTA. I started getting writing assignments, so that was a part of. So I basically became a Hollywood screenwriter at that point. But it's such a hyper competitive business. Even when it's just for context for people get it. Like you got a better shot at playing Major League Baseball than getting into the Writers Guild in Hollywood. That's how competitive it is. And the reason is you're competing against three generations ish to get into
Mhm.
a Writers Guild in Hollywood. You're competing against one generation to play baseball.
Mhm.
So and you still have the majority of people that are in the Writers Guild not even making any money. Like I think 5,000 people last year in the Writers Guild billed anything, and then there was another, I don't know, 5,000 or something that didn't make a dime. And then some people make a lot, and then some people don't. So, anyways, so reinvention, first to like put food on the table while I was independent filming, and then from independent filmmaker to screenwriter, and then while I was doing screenwriting assignments, also some teaching, and then reinvented again because I 5 years at UCLA Extension, and I was like, this is okay, but like all this deep stuff I was doing in my personal growth work, I was like, that's where it's at. Like that's really where my heart is. Like deep transformation was the stuff I was writing about. It was the experiences that I had facilitating other people and going through myself. And then I was like, oh, I've basically been training to be a life coach for 20 years. What if I'm a life coach for screenwriters and creatives and, anybody that really wants to get life coaching from a guy like me? And that was great. And that practice has been going well. And now the new reinvention moving forward is AI is coming and is going
Mhm.
to, I predict, completely obliterate the current Hollywood system. So movies are very expensive, um, and once AI can come in and basically you can make whatever movie you could imagine for a couple $1,000, a couple whatever, as opposed to millions. Now that bottleneck in Hollywood, where it's like we're only going to bet on these certain, and you have to basically get chosen what's going to make that goes away. You basically go directly to your audience. So that experience that I had with that one clip going up on YouTube and a million people saw it. Now that's going to be more of my future. Basically, going to returning to my independent filmmaking roots, but using these digital, like to run my coaching practice, I've needed to learn to be a digital entrepreneur, digital marketing, social media, that sort of thing. So I'm really going to be basically applying those skills to my independent filmmaking career, and that to me is kind of like there's a cohesiveness of everything I'm doing, you know. And then most of the people I coach are basically either screenwriters or independent filmmakers wanting to walk that same path. And like, how do you sort it out? Because we all have access to a billion people, billions of people, but like, how do you find the right ones, and how do you communicate? And I hate social media, and that's how people feel.
So you're clearly a reinvention expert. I would the word expert maybe has a connotation, but you've done it so many times, right? And in many cases successfully. So how do you determine a risk that's worth taking versus a risk that may go against your purpose?
A risk that's worth taking versus against your purpose. Well, ultimately, I think we're feeling, or I feel for my life purpose, my calling, and I just whatever it takes to do that, and to be grounded and realistic and say I've got a family to support. I live in LA. It's expensive here, so um, it's just looking at what the opportunities are as honestly as I can because I tend to be an optimist, and then just saying, okay, well, this seems pretty reasonable. I mean, for me, for anybody in the arts, there's a lot of, if you're teaching painting or music lessons or whatever, there's, I mean, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, there's all like because it takes time to dial in that voice and the reflection and all that stuff. You need to, it helps to have multiple income streams.
Mhm.
So, so when you're discerning which extra income stream makes sense and why, um, the idea is to check in with that calling and saying, does this harmonize? Like, am I going to be miserable doing income stream A, B, or C when I really want to do that? You know what I mean? But ideally, you do, the minimal amount of income streams. Well, it's nice have few, right? Because things are going to go up and down. But I would say if if the further we are away from a calling of something that feels deeply aligned and purposeful, it's just the more problematic. There's more friction. We're not really realizing why we're on the planet. But we only can be aware of what we're aware of. So sometimes, a lot of people are like, well, I don't have a calling. I don't have a life purpose. I don't know. And there's things you can do. There's things I've done in personal growth groups where you can write out a mission statement. You can, Simon Sinek has that great TED talk about finding your why, you know, what matters to you. So I think there's some people that are very successful that don't even think in those ways. And there's some people that actually, you know, but it's like you just have to, we're all in this sort of weird, mysterious bubble of our own existence. And we don't know, what's going to happen next. We can't change what happened in the past. And it's really about coming to peace with the basics of existentialism, and then and having a life purpose can kind of help when it comes time to shoot, I need to make more money, or I need to just decide between two evils or two goods or whatever. And then you go back to like, well, what matters most to me? What are my deepest values? And then that helps make more grounded decisions.
I I absolutely love your answer. And it aligns very well with the direction that I wanted you to go in. And it's because if you don't know your life purpose, it's not a negative thing, but if you know your life purpose, it absolutely helps you make those tough decisions, those uncertain decisions, those risky decisions, because you can always go back and say, does this align with my purpose? And if it doesn't, then maybe it's not the risk you want to take. And so thank you
That's
for
right.
sharing that example and for referencing Simon Sinek, who I love. Um, because, you start with why, and it really makes decision making a lot easier in your career, in your life, everything.
Yeah, that's right. And I would add, it's been a really helpful tool for me. I think it's helpful for a lot of people. And it's the application of the tool where the rubber hits the road. It's like it's not that, you know, I have a sort of a deeper sense of my calling than most people that I've met, but it's not like I'm in rainbows and butterflies all the time because of it. It's it's the application of the idea. And it's sort of like there's a great story that Joseph Campbell talks about. Joseph Campbell was the guy that wrote A Hero with a Thousand Faces. He was very influential in this idea of the hero's journey that is a big part of Hollywood storytelling. Um, he was a comparative studied comparative religions all over the world. But he was teaching at Sarah Lawrence, and the student came up to him and said, "You know, Professor Campbell, you don't understand our generation. We've already got all the answers." And he goes, "Well, great. The only thing you missed out on is life." And so the point is, we can know the answers. We can even know our life purpose. We can even be doing it. But like, we're still going to face some uncertainty. We're still going to face doubts. We're still going to hurt. We're still going to face loss and need to grieve. Like, that's the human experience. And you know, and it can be really attractive to, like, part of, you talked about childhood stuff. You know, when it hurts, we want it to stop hurting, and so we'll do anything to kind of fill that hole. And so figuring it out sometimes is a go-to one for me, and I think for a lot of people. And what I think works better is, yes, leaning into a purpose if you know it, but just also accepting that, like, yes, sometimes life is going to hurt, and sometimes we're not going to be sure. You can be certain that there's going to be uncertainty a lot of
Mhm.
the time, and probably more than we prefer. And if we can get our mind around it and arms around it, it can actually be really amazing um, in the adversity.
Yes. So along those lines, um, if you could give advice to your younger self during one of the reinvention moments, what would you say?
Mm, that's going to be okay.
Yeah. Hindsight is always 2020 though. Um, and
Well,
so
so I'll go further then.
yeah,
Um, it is okay now. It's
yes,
ultimately always been okay, and it ultimately will be okay in the future, even though it hurts and it's uncertain sometimes.
right. And also to add to that, maybe you're not alone. Sometimes I
Mm,
feel like people who go into maybe a deep depression or isolation feel like they're alone, they don't have support. They're the only one that's going through whatever it is in that moment. And knowing that you're not alone and that, like you mentioned, and I wanted to make sure I came back to this, but men's group, and having people that may be in the similar situations that you trusted that you could talk to. So, what role and what level of support really helped you through some of those tough times?
that's a great question. I think one of the things that happened to me, so we talked about, how we coped with whatever we faced in childhood. So for me, uh, I was missing my father, and so I coped with it by being this good boy. And then he dies when I was 17, and in my 20s, I kind of swung the other way. I was a bit of a bad boy. Um, and what occurred to me at that time is this frustration because my mom and my sister were, the way that they weren't able to give me the support that I preferred, right? And then I used that as a thing, and I projected all sorts of stuff on them. Then over time, I was able to come around and realize, like, oh, there's this thing like called support groups, and that's where you can go get support, whether it's professional or a coach or like a therapist or a coach or just a men's group that support. And so once I really found that and was like, oh, like this is a place where I can just speak and be listened to and be heard and be challenged gently on things and be seen and feel like I belong. And once I got that, I didn't need that from my mom and my sister in the way that I thought I did. And once I wasn't putting that on them, my relationship with them got so much more amazing and authentic because I wasn't asking them to be something other than they were, you know.
Yeah.
And each of them had done their own personal growth stuff to one extent or another. But it was, again, I was just in this phase where I was hurting so badly and I was just projecting frustration on the world and them. But ultimately, when I was able to move through it and just go, oh, wait a minute, when I need support, I'll go with people who are into support. And then when I
Mhm.
want just like my family to hang out and be their family, I'll do that. And my friends will do that. So it's sort of right person, meet people where they're at, right people for the right thing.
Absolutely. Because if you're taking it out on the family, then it messes up the family dynamic and the relationships. So very insightful that you recognize that along your journey before it got to a bad place.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it was a bad reckoning. Like I was estranged from them for a couple of years, and I couldn't do it any differently. I didn't know how to stay in relationship with them and deal with the stuff inside me. And so I ended up not talking to them for a couple of years. And then once I was able to sort it out, they graciously were happy to pick back up again. And it was real beautiful. So and then it's interesting because I compare my relationship with my mom and sister with a lot of people, and because we had that clean break and clean reunion, it's there's a grounding that I see. It's pretty unusual. A lot of people that didn't do it kind of hold those resentments towards their family in a way that I was able to kind of flush out for the most part. So it was a rocky road to get there, but ultimately it came out the other side in a really beautiful way.
and maybe on the other side of the road, it was unconditional, right?
Hmm, that's right. That's right.
It's, I've
That's right.
forgiven
Yeah,
you
I,
for
I
what
didn't
we've
have
done, and no matter what, we are together. We are a unit. We may argue, but yeah, tell me
yeah,
more.
that's right. No, no, that's a beautiful way to say it. That when I came back, I didn't have the conditions. And partly I was like, well, I would like them if they did such and such. And then I got to the point where it's like, no, no, I just like them because I like them. And I don't have to have a condition, you know. So I was able to make that shift. And then they were also open at that point too. So I feel, deep appreciation for that.
Okay. So shifting to your career. So you are obviously, very ambitious and motivated and growth in your career. How do you balance that ambition of, moving to whatever that next thing is that's going to drive your business and your industry further with also just your personal well-being and self-care?
Mm. Well, I work from home, so I see I've got two sons. One just graduated high school, one's going into his sophomore year, um, and my wife is here too. So I see them all the time, and you know, uh, so that's great. And because I was, you know, hurting so much as a kid about missing my father, and put so much time and energy and awareness around it, I really made it a point to be the type of dad to my kids that I wanted to have myself. And so that's been great. So that's just been that's been a priority. So I, took time off yesterday to watch my son play basketball, so which I love doing. And yeah, so it's a matter of saying, well, what's back to life purpose, right? And then filling out your life purpose. If my life purpose is this thing, then how does family play in that? Well, I want to do that. And then the reality of it is discussions. My wife wants more of this. I want more of that. We have to talk about it. But what to the extent that we can sort of disagree agreeably, it's really beautiful, and that doesn't always happen. You know. Um, so, but that's the intention. So, yeah, it's. I think I see it in certain terms of service, really. So, right now I'm having a conversation with you to serve your podcast and your viewers. Maybe some of them like my vibe and will either refer me to somebody they know, or they want to work with me or something. So it's all service oriented. And then at the same time, I'm serving my wife. And what does she want from me in our marriage? And I serve my kids. What kind of dad do they want? And what kind of dad do I want to show up? But when I come up with this idea of service, and then even serving my body, am I eating healthy enough and exercising enough? But that kind of gets me out of my ego, and it's like, how can I help the team? How can I help this relationship? How can I help the person that's in front of me right now? Um, so that's a way I look at it that seems pretty helpful and impactful service.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you helping me in this podcast, and I hope it helps you as well. Um, when you reflect on your journey, personal and professional, what legacy do you hope to leave?
I think it's similar to the idea of the advice I'd give to myself that how things are, even if I'm feeling aggravated or frustrated or daunted or whatever, there really is a perfection in them. And so yeah, I would like in the movies that I make or anything that I make that lives beyond me, than my coaching practice or materials around my coaching practice or stories that I tell, that there's a spirit of acceptance and an enthusiasm for aspects of life, and an embrace and appreciation as they are. Um, yeah, that feels sort of like legacy energy for me.
And what about also just being known as a storyteller that connect? I mean, I'm getting this from our conversation, a storyteller that connects with the human experience.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, all stories really are speaking to the or intending to speak to the human experience. And when we see our favorite movies, like Full Metal Jacket is one of my favorite movies, there's a belonging that happens. And so, and when there's a belonging, there's almost like a forgiveness and a grace and an appreciation. So, yeah. So for the people that connect to my movies. Oh, here's another way to think about it. Like there was because I would coach my sons in basketball, when they were younger. And I loved it. And because I was an athlete and I spent a lot of time thinking about coaching, but I was thinking in a bigger picture. I wasn't just like, hey, let's win this game. I mean, I was competitive, but I was really thinking about the bigger picture. Like I was literally going, I want to coach these kids in a way where I will see them 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, and I'll go, oh my God, Coach Brooks, that was an amazing season. Like to me, I feel chills thinking about that. And so that to me speaks to this legacy energy too, where it's about something bigger. It's about um yeah, just like showing up and being a part of this unfolding infinite universe in my own way on that life purpose, um, seeing it as it is in all the horror and the, you know, contradictory aspects of it, and the beauty of it. Um,
Excellent. My last question, you know, you're obviously very focused on the long-term future and the legacy you want to leave. What's one internal or external obstacle that you're working to overcome to reach that next level?
oh, it's just anxiety. So I've written 45 scripts, and had a creative session yesterday, and I was locked up. I felt this tension in my throat, felt tension in my body. um I mean, the difference is I'm aware of it as it's happening, and I don't force it. I just kind of sit with it. But it's anxiety. It's 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 not the sort of feeling that I prefer, but it is the feeling of threshold guarding to a deeper experience. So when we go deeper into our psyche to create something, you're going to come up with anxiety sometimes. I think it happens less to me often. I'm often in a deep flow state. Um, but I think when I'm ready to get to it, I'm on a precipice of a new, deeper level. I tend to get that anxiety threshold guardian. And so that's the only thing that's stopping me is if I don't directly sit with it and give it space and just be with it and be like, yeah, it feels kind of crappy right now. Um, if I kind of rush past it or force it or, you know, procrastinate or something, that's the only thing that can slow me down.
Okay.
Um,
Sometimes anxiety can cause you to focus more, right? Because you're
mm,
overwhelmed by so much happening, and sometimes it can be a disabler or something that, slows you down. And so thank you for sharing that because we all handle it differently.
yeah, yeah. I found for me because I talked to a lot of writers who are I've been working on the script for years, or I get stuck in certain places, and part of it's just they don't have a process that's all that reasonable and step by step. Part of it's they don't understand the structure, what they're actually aiming. They're not even aiming at the right goalpost really. And then part of it's this anxiety management thing. It's like because we all are lying to ourselves in a sense, in one way or another, and so how we reconcile those sort of that level of honesty or self-honesty. Um, and I don't mean lying in a bad way. I'm just meaning what our perception is limited, and then we have
Mhm.
to make communication choices or even awareness choices of what we're paying attention to and what we're not. And in those choices, we're focusing on one thing and not another, right? And that's where it's rife for drama, right? Drama is always good when, the character presents one way and we all see that they're another way. And that's fascinating characters, right? So the difference between text and subtext. So in our own existence, though, it maybe not so funny because we really think we're trying to do this, but sometimes we're trying to do that. So it's in that discrepancy. That's where we try to, the intention is to find the integrity. So we are saying this and doing this. We're attempting to do it and then being gentle with ourselves when, the integrity is less integrous than we want.
Mhm.
Because that's the human experience, right? Is sometimes being in integrity, sometimes being out, and then trying to find our way back in. And that's, by the way, how story structure works. In the beginning, the hero is out of integrity, and then they go through these series of trials and tribulations. In the end, they have some sort of integrous um, point at the climax in Act Three, where they it all comes together and they have the insight. Whether it's tragic and it's like definitively changed for the worse, or you know, um, a happy ending, like most of them, where it's like, oh, they got to their new thing, their integrity, they're ready.
Mhm. Wow. Lessons in storytelling, this entire discussion. Man, I'd love to do more. But I want to be conscious of your time. So thank you so much for all of the insights shared. Thank you for taking the time to do this podcast. I really appreciated things that you shared about, the reinvention and advice you'd give your younger self and integrity and storytelling. And so I wish you continued success. And thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. I really appreciate you inviting me to be here.
Okay, Brooks, take care.